Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
I'm Pete Wissinger.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today we're going to talk about maybe the most special types of games out there, which are lifestyle games. These are the games that people dedicate kind of their entire hobby lifestyle to, is to an individual game. This is not necessarily something that's unique to board games. We can kind of talk about sort of how this shows up in various types of tabletop and maybe non-tabletop games. So I'm excited to dig into this. Jake, have you yourself ever been into a lifestyle game? I know the answer is yes, right?
Yes. Yeah. I have. So my main one has been Magic primarily throughout many parts of my life. I've grew up sort of cutting my teeth on that. Then I've taken some breaks and kind of revisited it. I also got really into the game Keyforge and started a podcast on that one.
Right.
Which we can talk about in this podcast. And then also like, non-game stuff, sport. I'm a big fan of recreational sports. So I feel like at certain times in my life, disc golf or kickball or soccer earlier on were lifestyle games for me too. If we want to quantify those, which of course I do.
Of course. Well, before we jump into our main topic, the hosts want to do a sort of mailbag, ask us anything sort of episode. But in order for us to do a listener question episode, we need listener questions. So, Jake, if people want to ask questions to us as a collective or to any individual host, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'd say there's three ways. The very best way would be to go on to decisionspacepodcast.com/Patreon, our Patreon page, which is really just a way that people can support our show and throw us a few bucks if you appreciate what we're doing. So we'll have a thread up there, and those will be like guaranteed. We'll definitely answer all the patron questions that we get. But you don't have to be a patron to participate. We'll also have a thread up in our Discord, as well as we will be taking questions from our email. If you don't want to sign up for anything or create an account anywhere, you could just email us at Decision Space Podcast. Is it Decision I think it's decisionspa@gmail.com.
I think that is correct. Yeah. If I'm sure that
It's in the notes.
It's in the show notes. So there's this ancient technology called email. You could use that. You could get with the times and jump on Discord.
Yeah.
And
if it isn't clear already, that's probably the worst way to ask us a question.
But as Jake said, if you are a patron, we're absolutely prioritizing patron questions. I think it's going to be fun. As one of the new hosts this year, I've never done a listener question episode. So pretty exciting.
And definitely ask us anything. I want this to be like a true AMA. So you ask us game. I assume most of the questions will be related to board games, but if you have other questions about us, ask away.
Yeah, if anyone wants the casserole recipes that, are our go-to staples, or maybe tips on purchasing cheap airfare, I don't know, whatever. We're just going to be answering whatever questions you've got.
Yeah, it'll be a blast. So looking forward to that. So yeah, we'll probably do that in a couple of weeks. So don't delay. Get your questions in now.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let's jump then into our feature topic.
I can't wait to dive into this. I've got a lot of thoughts about lifestyle games, but I do want to pose that question back to you. Pete, have you participated in any lifestyle games or in a game to an extent that you felt like it was a lifestyle?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like you, Magic the Gathering was pretty big for me almost exclusively as a middle school activity. That's when I got into Magic. And I actually, as a middle schooler with a couple of my friends, would go to the nearest college town and go to tournaments at a game store. And so it's like all these college kids and then this small group of middle schoolers in these like Carbondale, Illinois Magic the Gathering tournaments. So I never did particularly well in them, but it felt so cool. And the other one is, and I have it on my list here. If Dungeons and Dragons counts as a lifestyle game, which I think that it does, then I also was heavily into Dungeons and Dragons at various points in my life. Would you call D&D a lifestyle game?
Yeah, I think so, and we'll have to get into sort of like definitions for what this is shortly. But by I think like sheer scope and engagement with D&D, it has to qualify.
For sure. And it's a little bit of an exception to the rule because I think we should probably jump into definitions
Yeah.
because for the most part, these are competitive games. And I think that the first definitional marker of a lifestyle game would be that this one game for many people is a hobby completely unto itself. It is not just a game they play, it is the game they play.
Yeah, I was thinking about, if you went up to a chess grandmaster and and we were talking about chess, you're like, "Cool, what other board games do you like?" They'd be like, "What are you talking about?" There are other board games. Um, and I think, so chess is a great example, right? Where it's like people who are really into chess, maybe even professional chess players, right? Just because chess is a board game, that doesn't mean they give two rats about the this year's Kennerspiel recommended games, right? They're kind of one and done with chess, and there's tons of games that fit into that category as well.
Yeah, if I'm thinking of like other classic games, I know that for some people, they are really into like bridge and maybe go to like bridge clubs and participate in bridge tournaments, or some people are very into like mahjong or dominoes. These kind of traditional classic games, I think, uh, can be lifestyle games, especially if they're, and these are mostly ones that are popular for adults, I would say, and have been around for a really long time. And, these are not people that are maybe gamers in any other sense that we think about, right? Like they just play bridge or they play um, spades or whatever. I don't know if something like spades or hearts really counts because I think one definitional marker for me also is that these are not necessarily specifically like kitchen table games, but these are games that you go to perhaps organized events to play much of the time. Would you say
Yeah,
that also is a marker?
definitely. I think a game like Hearts is probably a good one for proving that point, which is that I don't think it's enough if to say like I only play this one game and therefore it's a lifestyle game, right? There are lots of families that only play Uno, and I don't think we would say like just because that's like the game that they play or a Yahtzee or a Monopoly that those games are inherently lifestyle games because they're like the one game that folks might play. I think that leads me to the same conclusion as you, that there has to be something beyond just being the only game in somebody's life. And I think there are probably a bunch of different ways that you could kind of like get to the critical mass of things that make it a lifestyle game. But I think like something external to the game itself is huge, whether that's like a tournament scene or and maybe we'll talk about this more, but like content too. Like that's one of the things with D&D, I think, where it's like if you like D&D, you can not only play it, you can go watch movies about it, you can listen to like countless podcasts about it, both about like the strategies and stuff, but also like people actually just playing it. Um, so I think that is a big part too.
Well, and the other thing is that there's oftentimes a creative or expressive element to it, and D&D is that like to the extreme where people will like, draw pictures of their characters, or some people will, you know, have costumes that they wear to conventions, or they'll collect really fancy sets of dice, or for a dungeon master there's all this gaming outside the game that goes on, and that's also part of it. And I think about other of these lifestyle games that I would say part of what makes it a lifestyle game is that there is a way that you engage with that game as a hobby, even when you are not playing it competitively. So if we think about chess, people study chess. Some people even take lessons on chess. And if we think about something like Magic the Gathering, the crafting of your deck is this kind of outside of the gameplay way to engage with the game or studying the meta. And a huge example of this would be tabletop miniatures games like Warhammer, where people buy these armies that they paint, they read novels and engage with lore about it. They spend I've heard for people who are into Warhammer that the actual hobby of Warhammer is painting and that the game is just a bonus. That like it's cool that there is a game for me to use all these miniatures for, because the real joy of Warhammer is collecting and customizing the miniatures. The game is just like fine.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think I might put it in a slightly different term, so I agree with what you're saying, which is that like for a game to be a lifestyle game, there has to be almost like an endless opportunity or way to engage with it. So I, I said that T Call was my number one game on our most recent top 10 list. And maybe I think T Call is so good that I would never get bored of it, even if that was the only game I played and I wanted to play it twice a week, for the rest of my life. Um, I still don't think that would make it a lifestyle game for a number of reasons, but one of the big ones is what you're saying. Like there's not really anything I can do between sessions of playing the game to engage with T-Call. I could go online and watch reviews of it. I could find, other podcasters that have reviewed the game, but eventually I would just be out of T-Call content, um, and out of ways to kind of like engage with it beyond playing. So I think there needs to be something happening. Like it doesn't have to be new stuff coming out, right? Obviously, chess doesn't have new versions coming out, but there is like a media cycle, right? You could follow competitive tournaments. Magnus Carlsen was recently in the news because he like blundered in a big.
And he banged his hands on the table.
And I'm not even a chess person, right? But that came onto my radar. Um, so there's stuff that like that other people who are also part of this lifestyle are like aware of and knowing about, and like new topics to always be talking about in these lifestyle games.
Yeah, I think that maybe what we're kind of getting around here is that there is a community element to lifestyle games that there are a lot of people who are a part of this, and there is this like social element of the game where you go to events or are on these maybe online forums or whatever, and this is where a lot of the competitive scene happens, but it's also just where you can kind of have an entire social circle that's built around a single game. Which, one thing I want us to get to at the end of this podcast, since this is a board game podcast, is address the question of whether or not board games could be lifestyle games. I think I think where we're going to get to by the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the community aspect is huge. I think for most of these lifestyle games, you could be like, here, I'll pose a question to you, Pete. Do you think you can engage in a lifestyle game without actually playing the game?
um, I think you probably could, right? Like, you know, if I was, well, actually, some examples for me, actually, a game that I have always kind of wished that I was into Warhammer. Like I have added starter armies for 40K into a cart on like a website so many times and not pulled the trigger on that. But what I have done is I've like watched lore videos, and I've watched painting tutorials. And so I'm sort of like dipping my toes into what it would be like to be into this without ever in my life playing a game of Warhammer.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be hard maybe to like be you know be a lifestyle gamer without ever playing the game, but like if I used to play a lot of chess and now I just follow the competitive circuit, right? And I'm not really playing anymore, but like I'm watching the tournaments live and stuff like that. I was thinking about the way like people engage with the NBA, which is on my mind because the finals are going on right now. Um, a lot of NBA fans probably do not, or certainly do not play basketball in their day to day life, yet they're still like part of this lifestyle game because of the larger community aspect of it.
But if I'm just a basketball fan, but I don't
Yeah.
play basketball, does that count as basketball being a lifestyle game for me? Or am I just a fan of like, is there a difference?
I mean, I don't know. It's I think that is an interesting question. And maybe we're splitting hairs. I don't know how many people are out there watching the Magic the Gathering Pro Tour who don't also play Magic. That we're probably approaching a pretty vanishingly small number of people in
Right.
that group. And maybe the same is chess. Same with chess as well. But I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, I think honestly, like if if you watch every chess tournament, even if you don't play, like that's good enough for me. Like, sure,
I
chess lifestyle person.
does it count that I watch videos on Instagram of people opening up packs of Pokemon cards? Does that count as me engaging with the Pokemon hobby?
I think so. Like, I think that all of this stuff creates kind of like a critical mass that leads something to be a lifestyle game. And not all these are created equal. Like, obviously, Pokemon is a way bigger property than anything else we're going to be talking about here. Um,
Yeah.
but
Um,
I think all of that, every Pokemon thing is kind of like all bleeding together in sort of a way that you can't really separate the manga from the video game, from the trading card game, from the
sure.
Instagram videos.
Yeah, yeah. I think that another thing that all of this brings up to me is that this is also an area for video games that there are video games with heavy competitive scenes. Esports is like a huge deal now. Um, and I think that for competitive video games and like video game tournament scenes, I think these can count as lifestyle games. Like if you're someone who is just like trying to boost up your ELO and be like one of the best StarCraft players in the world, or if you participate in those big fighting game tournaments and that can I think also be a lifestyle game, even if you're the kind of person who is like a world ranked Smash Brothers player, you probably play other video games. It's probably just one video game you play, but that game crosses I think over into the lifestyle label.
Right. Like your Twitter bio says like Smash Bros player, not like video game fan, right?
Yeah, and if you try to get like high ranking in tournaments, then it probably does creep over into lifestyle game.
I think so. Again, I think like it's probably not enough alone that tournaments exist for your game. I think a lot of companies will publish a game, maybe with, we'll talk about kind of the design considerations, but maybe with the big dreams of, you know, getting the next Magic the Gathering on their hands, and they'll support it in the first couple years by hosting tournaments or like a professional circuit or something like that. And I think that certainly could lead to something being a lifestyle game if it's really well supported and there's like big prize money and people are taking it seriously. Then sure, I think that can get there. But just having like come play in the championship at Gen Con, yeah, I think that is it has to be more than just that.
Fair enough. I think okay, looking at other maybe common qualities of lifestyle games. Uh in general, these are skill-based games, and they're games that you get better at by studying it, playing it, and dedicating yourself to the strategic depth of the game. And of
Yeah,
course, there's exceptions to that. Some of the odd ones out here. If I think Dungeons and Dragons for many people is the only game they play, but D&D is almost more of a it's a totally different type. Role playing games
yeah.
are not competitive games. It's a totally different sort of thing. But in general, these are games that people work hard to improve their skills in, and that there is some sort of high skill level to it. Like something like Go, you can learn the rules of Go in almost no time. But to be a Go player requires a lot of dedication to the art of playing that game.
Right. Yeah, I think that high skill ceiling is crucial for these games. You know, I think like so much on this podcast, we kind of get into a case where we can't just come up with like the definitive list. We come up with a list of things where like you're more likely a lifestyle game if this. And I certainly agree that like, you know, being a competitive game, being a high skill game leads down that route. I also think it helps if there's like gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Like if being the best in the world actually leads to fame and riches, a la Magnus Carlsen, um, that is something that also for me makes it more likely to be a lifestyle game just because I think that will naturally lead to more people dedicating time and effort into, right? Like I can tell myself a story as a kid playing Magic that like yes, I'm having fun, but also one day I'm going to be on the pro tour and like honing my skills will be very useful to me in my future as a professional Magic the Gathering player.
I think if you are a professional player of anything, then that game is a lifestyle
Yeah.
game, I think.
That's fair.
Um, yeah, I think this is another sort of common marker that I would say exists, that the kind of classic games like chess or Go or bridge don't necessarily gel with, is typically lifestyle games have a lot of products involved with them. These are
Mhm.
typically things that the company that creates this game is constantly releasing things for this game, so that you're not just improving your skills with the game, but the game itself is changing. And in order for it to be your lifestyle game, you have to kind of keep up with that. There's typically a high financial buy-in required for a lot of these lifestyle games.
Yeah, like there's actually like a new I kind of mentioned earlier like I think that leads to there being a news cycle, something to follow along and like learn about, which also keeps people engaged, right? Keeps people like wanting to come back in a way that the 25-year-old T call doesn't exactly have. Um, I was actually listening to a Magic podcast called Limited Resources recently, and they did a kind of like an Ask Me Anything style episode as well. Um, and somebody like kind of like asked them about how they plan their show, or they were like thinking about starting a Magic podcast, and they explained that their show basically operates on like a sort of media cycle. Like new set comes out, they review the set, then the next 2 weeks, or they're like learning about the set, sharing like key takeaways, and then they do the sunset episode of the set, and then it's like previews for the new set, and that's just kind of the way it goes over and over. And I think that type of pattern is something that exists in many lifestyle games where it's sort of like, oh, the new thing got announced, hooray, like the new thing's here. Okay, what did we think of the new thing? Oh cool, the new thing is announced.
Yeah, and this is another area where I think Dungeons and Dragons does fit, because they're putting out new books for Dungeons and Dragons almost on like a monthly basis. And I think that actually part of the reason that these games can thrive and have such thriving communities is that businesses can make money on providing space for these games to be played. Like if there is a game that someone only buys one product of, and then they want their local game store or whatever to like host weekly nights for that game, they're gonna be like, well, no, like we're not gonna make any money off that. I think that the nature of these games with constantly having new products come out, that gives the companies the resources to promote the games. And it also gives the stores the incentive to host organized play for these games. And so that's where things like, I don't know if you've ever been to a store that does a lot of Warhammer stuff when there's people there playing these miniatures games, but like the tables are just like crowded with people. And it's like, oh well, yeah, of course, because while they're gonna buy some paint, they're going to look for the new sets that are out. So obviously they want to keep those Warhammer players being like, this is your store that you come to buy all your Warhammer stuff. Or obviously, I don't think there is any tabletop game store in America that doesn't host a weekly Magic night.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the economics of friendly local game shops well enough, but my understanding is that games like Magic are what is keeping the lights on. Like that is where a lot of the actual profit and revenue that sort of like facilitates other, the other products they sell. Because you need regulars, I think, right? I am very deep in the board game hobby, and I do not buy games very often. And
Yeah.
I'm not, certainly much less than I did as a kid, spending my like weekly allowance on packs of Magic cards or whatever.
Yeah. And, this is true of like all, of course, we've talked about Magic and I've mentioned Pokemon, but kind of there's constantly these trading card games coming out that are trying to be the next one that will stick, because I think there's a limited number of these trading card games that can exist with viable communities at once, and it seems like Magic and Pokemon are kind of set, and
Yeah,
then there's
and
always
Yu-Gi-Oh,
people
I think.
well, I think that now, like, I know there's a game store that I go to game nights at sometimes, and they carry a lot of Lorcana.
Okay. Oh,
um
okay. That
and
they're
so I
creeping
think that
up.
Lorcana is still going pretty strong, and the Star Wars one is, I think, going pretty strong. And these are situations where, for a game that asks for a lot of financial investment, people being invested in the IP is huge. And Magic has a little bit of that, right? There's some people who are really into the meta fiction surrounding Magic the Gathering, and they put out these themed sets that are explicitly trying to target fans of IPs that might not be Magic players.
Right. Yeah, Final Fantasy drops in 2 days.
I would
The
draft that.
Magic the
I would
Gathering
draft the
set.
heck out of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's some funny like chatter where like nobody likes the idea that Magic is like expanding into IPs, but like when the IP that you like gets introduced as a Magic set, you're like, hell yeah, I can't wait. Um, yeah, so I think it's really interesting. Probably I like your point about uh, if there's a local, if your local game store is hosting a weekly tournament night of this game, that is something that kind of like meets that bar, as long as people are attending. When I was doing the Keyforge podcast, I remember, I think Keyforge maybe cracked number 3, in sales for a quarter or a half a year, maybe a year, I don't remember. And we were like, dang, like Keyforge is really doing it. And then it went off the deep end. It got hit by COVID or whatever. And I think one of the interesting things about that, why there can only be so few of these, is because it's the same as when you ask the grandmaster like what other board games are into. It's like, cool, you're a Magic player, so you're probably like definitely interested in trying this game Keyforge by the same designer as Magic. And they're just like, no, not at all. Like I only play Magic.
Yeah. I also think that we kind of mentioned this, I think, when we were talking, we've in the past, we've talked about expression in games before. And I think that there's typically a high level of various forms of expression in engaging with a lifestyle game. One in sort of playing it your own way. Typically, these games encourage a different play styles, but also that typically these are games that have more content than you will ever actually use. So you have this kind of aesthetic expression in terms of which parts of this game you personally specialize in.
Yeah, totally. Like as soon as you are thinking about yourself like with traits for the way you engage with the game, right? Like I know that I'm a red mage in Magic. Like I like to use red cards. I like to play aggressive strategies, and uh probably because of that stylistic preference, I tend to do much better when I am using an aggressive strategy in these kind of games than when I try to do a combo strategy or a more controlling strategy. I don't know like when to pull the levers and hit the buttons as efficiently as I do with the aggro strategy. Um,
Yeah, my friends in middle school, when we all were playing Magic, we essentially each had a color that we called dibs on, and we would just give each other the cards of that color when we busted open packs. And so I was green. I was a green player. I liked making a lot of mana and putting out big creatures because I loved big creatures with big stats. That was kind of the sort of Magic player I was, which is maybe why I was never good in tournaments because I don't think that that has ever maybe been the meta
yeah,
of Magic, but yeah.
dude. Yeah, it's funny. Again, I think this kind of like goes to the community aspect of it, but I think there's also like in addition to the way you might start seeing yourself as it relates to the game, it could also be that there's like a shared language and shared understanding. Like Magic players talk in a certain way. The way Magic players talk about sort of heuristics and strategies in games, is very similar to the way that we in the board game hobby kind of talk that, but the vernacular is not exactly the same to the point where I think like there's key phrases that I could be like, that's a Magic the Gathering person. Like if somebody ever says like, there's a world where this card is good, I'm like, you play a lot of Magic.
So let's get into maybe the pros and cons of these types of games. And we've been kind of in the positive. So let's stay in that zone. I think you maybe have more experience with these competitive lifestyle games than me. What would you say are sort of the good things of having a lifestyle game? Like, let's start rosy before
Yeah.
we get into the very large negatives. But what's great about having a lifestyle game?
Yeah, I think like the biggest one is that there is inherently a community that you can tap into. And that doesn't mean that these are all like welcoming and inclusive people exclusively who play these games. And, without getting negative, I think that's an area for improvement, like almost across the board. But like if you're like, I want to start playing chess, like there is almost certainly people you can find in your local community wherever you are in the world that you can play with. And if you can't because you're like, in a very remote part of the world or whatever, um then you could still hop online and find people of like similar skill level instantly to play with. And I think that creates sort of like a sense of like togetherness, right? Like I'm not Magnus Carlsen, but like we're both kind of a part of this same world. And I think that is like very cool. Like being able to sort of like find community in whatever your thing is. I think that's like the biggest strength for me. And then number two, I talked about this a little bit more, would be that idea that there's just like endless ways to engage. Content is has like a bad is a bad word, I guess, these days, where it sounds bad, but I actually think it's like really nice. Like when I get into a new hobby, I can kind of remember actually the board game hobby writ large when I first sort of played pandemic and was like, wait, board games are actually sick. And I kind of like went down the rabbit hole online and I found Board Game Geek and I found Shut Up and Sit Down and watched like so many videos and was like, I kind of like vibe with these people that are like talking in this space. Like all this stuff seems really cool. So it's nice that that these games sort of like offer that on ramp where it's like you could just play a game of chess with your friend, but you could go as deep as you want, or or poker or magic or uh Pokemon or whatever.
Yeah, I think that another element here is, and just to piggyback off what you said, is that part of the reason I got into designing games is that I was just thinking about games way more than I was actually playing them. And I was just craving for a way to engage with tabletop games when I wasn't playing because I'm thinking about games all the time, but I'm only playing games like once or twice a week. So what do I do with that? How do I turn this into something bigger? And lifestyle games just give you so much of that, right? Like there can be so rewarding to engage in because if you have a lifestyle game, it's something that just keeps giving in terms of things that are interesting, things that are um, ways to maybe improve your skill or to customize something. So, just the fact that it widens the scope of what the hobby is outside of actually playing it, I think is a huge component.
Yeah, and that there's different ways too, right? Like you said with Warhammer, like there's playing the game, but there's also painting the game, and there's also reading lore, and sort of like the way that you want to engage with it is there also, and there's other people doing it. I think that's kind of like just an add-on to kind of that like and endless content, endless opportunity to engage in these games.
I think another maybe obvious pro to having a lifestyle game is that not a lot of people love learning games. And if you have a lifestyle game, then you know the rules, right? You know how to play it. You don't ever have to relearn the rules. Maybe a new set comes out and there's new text or there's a new edition or whatever, but you essentially are constantly building off previous knowledge that you have acquired.
Yeah, what if we could tell you that there's a board game hobby out there with no rules teaches ever?
Right. Yeah, or you watch one Rodney Smith video and now you never have to do it ever again.
You're good to go. Yeah. It actually like I'm sold. That sounds so nice. I hate to
Yeah,
teach.
for
Uh
sure. And so I think that's a huge reason why people I think especially in the role-playing hobby, part of the reason Dungeons and Dragons is so huge when there's hundreds of role-playing games out there is that people know how to play it. And that I think is it, right? It's that you learn it and you're like, "Well, why would I learn another game? I already know how to play Dungeons and Dragons. I'll just play Dungeons and Dragons." It's not I think for people who are way into role-playing games, it's not like the best one. It's
yeah.
just the one everyone knows how to play, and that's kind of the most important component.
This actually is so fascinating in the context of board games. There's kind of this trend, I guess, where it feels like the first game to get to a mechanism is often like remembered as like the best one. Or, like you could say like Dominion in deck building. Like a lot of people still sort of like hold that up, or El Grande and area control. And I wonder if there's like an element of that, or Agricola in worker placement, where it's just like after people have played those games, every time they play another deck building game or worker placement game, there's like, yeah, it's like kind of like Agricola, but like I had to learn the rules. And that like
Yeah,
makes it
right.
like worse because I already
Yeah.
knew the rules this other one.
Any other pros before we start kind of the reason why maybe you and I don't really engage with these games that much, the
Y-
cons?
Yeah, let's get into some cons because there are definitely cons.
All right. So my biggest con is just that to really engage with one of these, especially one of these tabletop games, it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Like the idea of having to make large purchases on at least a quarterly, if not monthly schedule is just something I can't afford, right? So even if I did want to go all in on one of these hobby games, it would eat up like my entire hobby budget. And
Yeah.
so the expense is the biggest component for me.
So it's interesting because like you can play any of these games on the cheap, right? Like for all the TCGs, trading card games we're talking about, you can buy like thousands and thousands of like quote unquote bulk cards, perfectly good cards. They're just not good enough for competitive play for like pennies, and have more Pokemon cards than you could ever, use for very cheap, cheaper than your average board game. But it's a little bit more like I don't want to say like malicious or predatory because that feels like a little strong, but if you're doing that, you're not really engaging in the lifestyle game, right? Because you're missing out on all the conversation. You're not able to go to the tournaments and compete. You're not using the same cards as like the people that you see, uh, on YouTube or whatever. You're not, or Twitch. Chess even is like, that's cheap. You could get the chessboard, but like, to really do it, you have to dedicate so much time and genuinely money too, to get like chess coaches and go to like expensive chess schools and leagues, etc. So yeah, so I think there's sort of like, in all these games there's kind of like the haves and have nots, and they're having different experiences with them, which is a big negative for me.
Well, and they're made even more expensive by the fact that for some people, these are just things they collect. That there's this maybe like speculation on a secondhand price kind of collector's resale market, which makes things more expensive than they would be if you were just buying stuff. Like, I know people who don't play Pokemon, but just collect Pokemon cards or
Dude,
a
the
TCG that
Pokemon people are crazy.
I don't think how many people actually, I don't think people the main hobby of Pokemon it can't be playing Pokemon,
it's
right? It's
I
got to just
just
be collecting.
I just see like the videos on YouTube and Reddit of like people at Costco and Target just like mobbing clerks and people as they're trying to like reload the Pokemon cards. It's just like, these are not people that are like excited to play the game. They're just scalpers and whatever.
I've looked up also, and I've found that apparently one of the most expensive TCGs to get into the meta of is actually a smaller one called Flesh and Blood. I don't know if you've heard of Flesh and Blood, but
Yeah.
it's apparently really expensive because all the meta decks require these like couple of cards that have become very expensive to acquire.
Yeah.
And so, uh, yeah, it said that it says most competitive decks have 3 Command and Conquers and 3 Enlightened Strikes. And Command and Conquers, 3 of them is about $250, and 3 Enlightened Strikes is about $100. That's just for 6 cards.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully that's most of the cost of your deck. And
Right.
but what's crazy is like, so that's like $350. So maybe the whole deck is like 450 or whatever, which is like probably making board game listeners' jaw drop, but like that's just like totally par for the course. Like for people that are really engaging in these kind of collectible card games. I think like people would say like, okay, if you could get into like a competitive Magic deck for $400, the meta's in a healthy place.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that another thing that is a con for this, especially for maybe the decision space audience and people like me, is that there's so many games out there I want to play that to dedicate myself completely to one game is just not gonna do it for me anymore. Just because, in general, um, I've got this huge collection of games. There's constantly new games coming out that I'm interested in, and so I think it's the monogamy of having a lifestyle game that is difficult for a lot
Yeah.
of tabletop gamers.
I think there's like an interesting trait that a lot of people in this hobby, most of the people listening to this podcast, I would imagine share, which is that we're omni gamers. Like we like learning and playing new games. Most people in the world, I will hazard a guess, do not like the idea of learning a new game. If I just go up to, uh, let's say, 20 people in my work office and like, do you want to learn a game? I'm going to get like 18 no's probably. So I think that for us is definitely a con, but like it's kind of like the inverse of what you were saying about like you never have to learn another game. Like for most people, it's like sick. I never have to learn another game, but like for us, we're like I never get to learn another game. That's a bummer.
Yeah, I think that another issue is that since they are so community focused, that's both a positive and a negative of these games. Because, first of all, I might not have a strong community for that game near me, or maybe the people in my local community are really not my kind of people, Or maybe I'm afraid that I dig into one of these games and then the scene for it just kind of dies. And I've spent hundreds of dollars getting into one of these new games that I'm like, oh, maybe this will be my game. And so it makes it hard to get into any of them that aren't like one of the major, perennial games, just because keeping one of these communities going seems like a constant uphill battle.
Totally. There's a unique type of gamer out there that are like jumping in on all of these like new ones. And I think that's all like can be a totally fun way to like engage with the hobby, or like cool, like I was big into Netrunner and then I was big into Keyforge and I was big into this Star Wars game and then I was big in the next Star Wars game or whatever. Um I think it is a downside that there's like you could invest to get in because we have to invest in these games in most cases, and then it's not there for the long haul. But I do feel personally like often the most fun I'm having with a hobby is like that like initial onboarding, right? Where I'm just like taking the plunge. I'm just like, wait, there's this out there and this, and I'm learning about everything. Like I kind of think that's a delight. So as long as you kind of like go in with like eyes wide open that this might not be forever, and I just want to like enjoy the ride for the initial wave of this, like I think that's like an okay thing to do.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how, I think you mentioned that there's something that feels maybe exploitative or predatory about the release models for a lot of these games. And there have been attempts to be more consumer friendly with this style of game. Like for a while, Fantasy Flight was putting out these things they called living card games, which were non collectible card games that essentially worked in a way very similar to something like Magic. You mentioned Netrunner. That was one of the most successful examples of one of these types of games. And they were constantly putting them out. I got kind of into the Game of Thrones one for a little while, which is actually a really cool game. But they ultimately kind of fizzle out. And I was listening to so there's this game that is a new game in this space doing something kind of like the living card game model called Gudnak, which is this two-player dueling card game where it's really awesome. I love it. I've got the starter set for it. You got these square cards that are on a 3x4 grid, and you're moving them around and attacking and trying to essentially conquer your opponent's base, essentially. And it's a really great game. And they talked about how to make a living card game is actually just as much work as making a trading card game, but with none of the upside. Because you have to do as much tight designing and you have to make as many cards, but you just don't make the money on it that if you were to put them in booster packs, you would make.
Yeah.
And so it's just like economically a great model for consumers, but economically almost nonsensical for publishers.
Yeah, it's so funny because I hear what you're saying, and me as an intellectual person is like that is correct. Like the living card game model is better. But it is missing like the thing in my brain that's like I want to crack a booster pack. It's like it could be the good card.
Right. Well,
The
and so it's funny what the Gudnak guys are doing is they're actually making booster boxes that first of all you can use for draft, but also they're just cosmetic. So it's all the same cards that are in their standard boxes, but they're like foils or alternate art. And so they're kind of thinking about how so many live uh video games that people dedicate to, it's just like the skins and cosmetics that people pay extra for. Otherwise, it's free,
that's
kind
like
of free to play or cheap. And they're trying to do that with tabletop games, to
that's
where
cool.
they have collectibles, but they're purely cosmetic. And if all you want to do is play the game, just buy the set boxes.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's like Riot Games, right? League of Legends. Like
Yeah,
all their games are free and they're one of the most profitable companies out there because people just buy the cosmetics. They get so into the lifestyle, right? Like they really find like an identity. They're like, this is my character. So I must buy the $20 swimsuit outfit for them.
yeah, obviously. Yeah, and so like I don't know, Netrunner is one of these really interesting games where like objectively people who are into Netrunner are like this is the best of these competitive card games, right? Like there just isn't anything as deep and as mechanically novel as Netrunner. And it was pretty huge for a while. Um but I think as someone who was not totally engaged in Netrunner, but has done a lot of reading about Netrunner, it seems like it was just really difficult for the company to continue to put out quality products and maintain sales. And it just like was this sort of situation like I described where the community faded for whatever reason and really never got to some sort of like magic type level.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder why. I think it's interesting. Like I've engaged with the living card game model with the Arkham Horror game,
Yeah.
and that one is cooperative, like the uh, Lord of the Rings one, right? And so like there, I would buy like they would sell all these different products. Some of them are kind of like telling the narrative pack, and then you can buy like all these extra pack to get like more items to like improve your decks and stuff. But like I didn't care about improving my deck because I'm just playing as the game. So like half of the stuff they would release for that is just like not relevant to me at all. I would just play like I'll just like have a crappy deck and play on easy mode, and voila, I have like created a balanced experience.
Well, and if you were going to buy everything for that game,
Yeah,
it would be crazy, right? Like there's so much
so
content.
expensive. Yeah,
I know that there's this website called Team Covenant, and they kind of specialize in subscription services for these types of games, where you essentially they'll just ship you the new thing when it comes out, and you just pay a subscription fee to be like, I am subscribed to Arkham Horror, and they'll just mail you the stuff, and you just pay a subscription fee, which is kind
yeah,
of a wild model. And I think that Earthborn Games, which is like a bunch of people who used to work for Fantasy Flight, are trying to be like, well, what if we did that model, but we just slowed it way down so people could actually keep up with it, and we just
yeah.
did like one release a year. But then is that a lifestyle game?
Yeah, and then
We're outside of lifestyle territory at that
yeah.
point, right?
Now we're playing Root.
Well, listen, we're gonna get there.
I have one other thing to say about like the negative,
Please.
which is like I think that I kind of alluded to this before that like for whatever reason, whenever I've really engaged with one of these lifestyle games, I think Keyforge was kind of a notable exception for me. Like the community of people around it who are like really engaging in the lifestyle were not the kind of people I wanted to hang out with. And I do not want to paint like a wide brush. This is not saying all Magic the Gathering players are jerks or all Super Smash Bros players are jerks, but like the times in my life where I've seen people just like overtly bigoted language, and just like like really truly like gatekeeping, like you know, like oh, like I don't know, like not like welcoming people into the hobby, and I have like a memory of like trying to get into Super Smash Bros at one point in my life, and I think I was maybe like slightly older than some of the guys who were like kind of the best in the not like way older, but like a few years older than some of the guys who were like the best in the scene. And I was like went to a tournament and like was hanging out with them. They seemed okay. We went to like a restaurant afterwards, and they were just being like these people who are like kids basically. It's like such an inflated sense of ego because they were kind of like the biggest fish in like a very small pond. We're just being like just so obnoxious, like rude to the server. It's just like I don't know. Like there's something like I feel that it feels like it gets like inherently toxic among like top players in these kind of lifestyle games. I don't know what it is. I think it's something we should all like actively look out for, but just like be careful if you kind of go down this rabbit hole. If you have before, you probably know what I'm talking about, and it's a shame.
Okay. So, I mean, that's, yeah, I totally get that. And that's actually part of why I am constantly hesitant about going to like public meetups for any type of games. Um, because for me, games sometimes are only as fun as the people you're playing them with.
Yeah,
And so if you're reliant on public meetups and you don't have like good people locally who you're seeing at these and engaging with, it's just going to kind of like kill your desire to make this your lifestyle game.
Yeah. Right. And I do think, like, to be very clear, like board game meetups I've been to, like I haven't always like there are people that you just like don't vibe with playing game, but I haven't encountered like any of like the overt like rudeness, like overt kind of like talking down personally in that space I have in these like lifestyle game spaces. And I think it's because I mean, I think there's a variety of factors, right? All the factors we talked about, but like there's like sort of like a sense of status, like a sort of sense of like I'm the best. I'm like working up to something. Like it matters if who wins here. Um, yeah, so on and so forth.
I'm waiting for my dog to stop barking for a second before transitioning. Okay.
Okay,
Oh my god.
it's
This
really
is this is
quiet.
now that I'm the editor, it's like this is just on me.
Yeah, you're like,
So
oh no, I know. Yeah, just wait till people do the fun thing. Like, oh, I'm like, you'll just have to go back and like edit that out. Sorry, Pete.
when I did a podcast
Damn
with
it.
my friend, we did a podcast about the band The Decemberists. I would constantly on air be like, "You're going to go back and find this thing and edit in here," and just because he was the one who did it. Anyway, so you mentioned board game meetups. So what I want to get into, since this is predominantly a board game podcast, is it possible for a perhaps a single tabletop game to be a lifestyle game? Before we dig into it, do you have just a yes no answer to that question, Jake?
I think yes would be my answer.
Okay. So I have on this podcast described Root as a low key lifestyle game. It's my favorite game. And when I say that Root really is a lifestyle game, is a couple of things. First of all, it is a game that there is an organized tournament scene for, and there's like competitive tournament rules for the game. But also, it's a game that you really kind of have to dedicate yourself to it to really get stuff out of it. Um, like, it's a game that if you don't play it at least a dozen times, you're not really getting into the meat of sort of the depths of strategy. And people, there's metas for the game. There's entire podcasts and YouTube channels dedicated to the game. Um, I'm literally wearing a t-shirt of the game right now. So I think that people make fan factions, people make fan maps, like all of these things are signifiers to me of something that could be something like a lifestyle game.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we're. I for me like Root is a example of a game that's like right on the edge. Like if you're like telling me I love Root, it's like it's my lifestyle game. I'm not gonna disagree with you. I feel like it gets close, but maybe falls just shy. Like I think you could argue that it's not, and I feel like the reason that I wonder how many people out there are like I'm not a board gamer, I'm a root player in
Yeah,
the same way that
sure.
they would for some of these other games on this list. But I do think having a podcast is about dedicated to a game is definitely like a point in its category, right? Like that is feels like those people who are making that podcast, like it's definitely a lifestyle game for them.
So another one I have listed here that I think for some people is a lifestyle game is Catan.
Yeah.
I think some people Catan is a gateway game. And for other people, it's a gateway to just playing Catan.
Yeah.
And there's so many versions of it. People have these like tricked out 3D wooden boards. There's Catan tournaments, which is it's kind of a crazy game to have a competitive scene of, but there are like world tournaments for it. And
Is it any crazier than Root? Like a competitive Root tournament sounds like my actual nightmare, dude.
oh
Just
my
like
gosh. Oh
Root
my
people,
gosh.
just like
Listen, I've root pilled Brendan
okay.
already. So you're outnumbered almost, you
I
know.
think when I looked at this like list here, Catan is the one that jumped out to me as like I think yes, this one feels the most like a lifestyle game. Um, I was it you? Somebody in our Discord was saying maybe it was our friend JC was saying like Root's actually a terrible gateway game
Catan.
because oh yeah, Catan. Sorry. Catan is a terrible gateway game because like most people that play it never actually go on to play any other game. They just stick with Catan. Um, but yeah, like there's YouTube videos, there's world championships, there's tons of people that don't even know about the board game hobby who love playing Catan,
Yeah.
weekly. So I feel like that one is like for me, like the pendulum is just like puts it just like, yeah, this one counts, root, maybe not, but like they're both right there.
Yeah, another one that I know that if we're saying like this is the only game you play, this wouldn't count. But Twilight Imperium, I think for some people is something like a lifestyle game. I do know that there is a competitive scene for it. I know that there is a podcast dedicated to it called Space Cats and Peace Turtles. And, people have developed deep strategies for it. It's a game that you have to dedicate sort of an entire day to, which I think makes it difficult to be your one lifestyle game. But if you're someone who once a month has a whole day dedicated to Twilight Imperium, I think we're approaching something like a lifestyle game. Because if you were to say, "Oh, Magic's not my lifestyle game, but I go to a Magic tournament once a month," we'd be like, yeah, I think it maybe is a lifestyle
Yeah.
game for you."
I think these are like the lifestyle games of the board game hobby. Like it doesn't get much more lifestyle-y than these that we're talking about. Nothing's ever going to compare to like Magic, which itself doesn't really compare to like playing soccer or engaging with that. So, they're all on this spectrum, and I think it gets just like exponentially more lifestyle-y as you go into like bigger and bigger ones. But just by the very fact that Space Cats and Peace Turtles beats Decision Space for downloads, like
Yeah, right.
hell yeah, like hell yeah, dude, that counts.
Yeah, so the other big one is not necessarily one game, but it's a series of games, and that is people who are into train games. Um, this includes Cube Rails, 18xx, people who like are train game people. That might actually be the only games they play. There's entire conventions dedicated to train games. I know people on this one Discord server I'm on who every Saturday morning play train games together online, whether it be a Cube Rails or an 18xx. And these games share, there's not one game, but it's essentially one game system that people make their lifestyle game. And, people make fan maps for games, or there's like an Age of Steam convention, and there's this huge fan map kind of scene for Age of Steam, and people download these print and play 18xx games. I think that that's another area of the hobby that gets close to being a lifestyle game as a collective, if that counts.
I think it's funny that you're saying this because, like, could you almost make the same case of trick taking games?
That's yeah, I know. Maybe there's not. That's not true. I was gonna say there's not really like trick taking conventions. That's wrong. That's patently false. Um, I mean,
Yeah,
maybe,
it's probably it'd be a smaller subsection of the hobby than the train game subsection of the hobby, or maybe like at least insofar as like people who are just like all in on this one thing. I don't know. I'm not sure it fits for me because like yeah, I mean I it just and I think like the reason it doesn't fit is just that we're talking about a bunch of games.
sure.
Like that just feels like is that a lifestyle game? But if you're like I love 18xx, like 18xx is my hobby. Yeah, or maybe we're splitting hairs.
I think it's interesting when like normal hobby board games like you would see on someone's Calyx shelves, when they try and make competitive scenes out of those games. Like there's this big event in Las Vegas every year called the World Series of Board Games. Are you familiar with this event?
I've heard of it.
So in the World Series of Board Games, there's this list of games that they're doing a competitive tournaments of, and you like pick a couple of them you compete in, and if you advance in those games, the next round is like different games. And so it might be that like, okay, I specialize in like terraforming Mars and Arc Nova or whatever, and I qualified to go to the next round. It's like, okay, now I'm playing either Dune Imperium or Heat or something like that. And I just think it's so funny to think about sort of trying to build these tight competitive tournament scenes for games that were probably not designed to be played that way.
Right. Yeah, totally. I remember they had Acquire was one of the games they had, and like the first year, it was like what, like,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, like it's funny because we're again like I feel like this might be the kind of thing where it's like we're so deep in the hobby, but like it's kind of like that might appeal to more like casual gamers because I feel like once you're this deep in the hobby, it's like not cool to be good at games. Like,
Yeah.
you don't hear a lot of people ever like in the decision space Discord bragging about being like, I'm like awesome at board games. Probably the person that's closest to that is me. Um, but like, more often than not, like you hear people on podcasts being like, I was terrible. I got my butt whooped. I still had fun playing the game. Like, so it's just seems like it almost is counterintuitive to be like I'm going to try and get as good as I can at these games so I can go to this tournament and win, because what that means in practice is like it's not going to be fun playing these games with like any of my friends anymore, which is the
Sure.
reason I bought them.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you're someone who, you play board games with me and you're like, "Oh, yeah, I read, like, all the strategy guides on how to play this board game," I'd be like, "Why?"
Right.
Like, what but if that was true, if someone was like, "Oh, I'm, like, studying up on the meta for this, tournament I'm going to," it's like, "Well, yeah, of
Yeah.
course you are."
I think that is like another good marker, right? Which is that like should you expect that the other people that you're playing against have like prepped for this match beforehand. Like obviously at chess tournaments, poker tournaments, magic tournaments, root tournaments, and probably these big Twilight Imperium games, the answer is like yes, you would expect that the people you're playing against have prepped. Whereas for a non-lifestyle game, it's actually like the wrong move, like socially, to show
Yeah.
up like super prepped and like ready to like wreck people.
So you mentioned something about designing. Okay. Would you
Yeah,
say that like it is a worthwhile goal to try and create a game to be engaged with like a lifestyle game today? Or have we sort of moved past that point?
great question. I mean, like Richard Garfield, it feels like is still doing it. He is the person who designed Magic, um, the biggest lifestyle game we have in our hobby. Um, and it still feels like he's like making like taking more cracks at it, right? I know Keyforge, he says, is a game, one of the games he's like most proud of designing besides Magic, and it was like explicitly designed to like address the kind of like more uh maligned or we could say like insidious aspects of like competitive Magic the Gathering with like the price gouging and all that stuff. And people will argue about how successful that effort was at doing that. um, but to answer your question, like as a I think there's still like opportunity there for like making a splash, making money, um, in these kind of games. But as a player, like there's not much that like turns me off of a game quicker than being like, and it comes in booster packs, like, and I
I
feel
know.
like that's just because like I've like been there, done that, right? Like if I was going to like open a booster pack to like engage with something right now, it would probably be like something that I've already done. Like, I've got unopened booster packs of Keyforge, the decks. I've got like a ton of them behind me that like I haven't used. So it's just like, why I don't want more booster packs in my life personally.
One thing I think is cool is, are you familiar with the game Ashes?
Hmm.
Rise of the Phoenix Born? I think they recently did a thing to where now you can just buy individual decks and they just print on demand.
That's pretty
So
cool.
like you just like you just like build a deck and they'll just like mail it to you.
Yeah.
Which, like, talk about the most consumer friendly business model. I mean, like, I don't know that that's really doable for most publishers, but what a cool idea and a way to try and make the barrier to entry, which is one of the biggest problems with these games, as low as possible.
But like Do you think that would appeal to Magic players? Like if the next, I feel like if the next Magic set, they were like, oh, by the way, like we'll just print you whatever cards you
Right.
want. People would be like, that's
I
actually
know.
like devaluing my collection, wizards.
Right.
Like, they would,
And that's what's so funny is that like the game as a commodity is partially what makes it successful.
and also like it may like we can't deny the fact that like opening packs is fun and would be less fun if we could just have everything cheaply.
Yeah. It is something about the like addictive gambling nature of just collecting rare things.
Yeah,
And
and it,
I think that it's okay if modern designers would rather not do that.
yeah, for sure. I'm not saying anybody should, and I honestly think like what you were talking about with Goodknack or whatever, or
Yeah.
what Richard Garfield did with Keyforge a few years ago, what Ashes is doing, like it. I don't think we've seen yet in the hobby all the possible models that could
Right.
exist for putting out like a lifestyle type of game. Um, it like the gambling nature, right, of Magic packs is going to be hard to beat for
Mhm.
that aspect of it. But like it does seem like there's other axes that people are competing on that sound really interesting and exciting.
Yeah. And it's also cool that I know Magic has these other forms of play that have become popular that make it easier to engage with as a game. Like people who will just like make a cube or something like that, where, you know, that the allure of the lifestyle game, that there's room even within those games to welcome people in sort of a different way, but you're still like playing Magic.
Right. It's actually interesting. We've been talking about like, can a board game be a hobby game? And almost universally, no. But a hobby game can become a board game very easily with just a little bit of effort, right? Like if you spend small amount of money to like order cheap Magic cards to create like a cube that you can draft with your friends, like that is going to be a really fun gameplay experience in my opinion. I really like the like core game. Um and it would fit nicely into a typical game night.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think that, my last thing I have here is like, do you ever wish that you really had a lifestyle game right now? Because like I do sometimes wish that I had like one game that I could just do something with whenever I wasn't playing. Like for example, I had this big wooden box all my Dominion expansions were in, and it was too heavy to bring anywhere. And so I recently got a smaller box to put them all in. And so I reorganized all my Dominion cards. And there's something so satisfying about just like getting out all my Dominion cards, looking at them and sorting them. And I'm like, this is sort of part of the joy of having one of these types of games, right? Having like a binder of cards to flip through, right? So I do sometimes wish that I had some way to engage with that style of game.
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts. I think for me, like the board game hobby, like I have lifestyleized it by
Mm,
making this podcast, right? By
sure.
getting exactly what you're talking about, right? Like getting into game design, uh, you know, being a part of this decision space Discord community where people are there talking about board games all the time, talking about the new game news, right? The news cycle, um, creating and listening to other content. So all these things that I think are quintessential of a lifestyle game, while it doesn't exist in any one game, it does exist in the board game hobby writ large and the way I'm engaging with it. And I think Board Game Arena also is like something that makes that really easy and attainable and not cost prohibitive to people. Um, I think like this has become my lifestyle, and I'm just a person that like I'm geared towards going all in on whatever hobby that I'm doing. Like I enjoy it. It's just the kind of person I am. So that's my first thought. And the other piece is recently my baby turned 6 months this week, but there was like kind of a period there, the first 3 or 4 months of his life, where I was not able to engage with the board game hobby, at least like play games in person, the way that I have in the past. And even now it's like much more difficult to get out to game nights, and will be for a long time. um, though I'm doing it again, which is awesome. And it like I revisited Magic, just playing like on or on like Magic Arena on my phone, or on the laptop during that time, and like it felt sort of nice. Like it felt like returning like home to like some sort of like familiar community. Not a perfect community, not a perfect home, but like trying to check out some of the new sets and listen to some podcasts about it, like remembering like the funny way Magic players speak, like and they're like, oh, there's a world where this card is good, or like, can you see the world where like you get a 2-for-1 by playing this card on turn 4? And I'm like, I used to talk like that, man. And it just felt really nice. So so yes, like there's definitely times in my life where I want that. I think it's something like I have access to and can like get the nice parts out of. Maybe I give myself too much credit, like, but get some of the nice parts with leaving some of the bad parts behind, not feeling like I need to spend all the money in the world to engage. Um,
That's great.
so yeah,
Well, any finishing thoughts on lifestyle games?
um, we should design one and just make lots of money.
That's it. That's it. That's the biggest allure of designing these games is maybe you'll get really rich off it, right? I mean, that's kind of the biggest goal, you know?
Oh, we're way over time for this podcast, but maybe in the Discord we could talk about like our friend Jamie at Stonemeyer Games and their like span games. Is our span games a lifestyle game? Let's answer that in the
I think for
Discord.
some people, Wingspan is a lifestyle game, actually.
No, but
I
then
think,
like and like I feel like that's like all kind of similar, like a little bit of a different twist on the model, where it's like, yeah, there's Wingspan, there's all that stuff, but then there's also like more span, right?
yeah,
Now
for
now we're
sure.
playing Fist Span.
I'm a Span fan. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening. If you want to join our Discord and tell us what your experiences with lifestyle games have been, do you have one you currently engage with? Did you used to engage with one? What was good about that? What was not good about that? How can it be exciting for people who want to explore that kind of world? We want to hear it.
And ask
Um,
us anything about
please
anything.
send us questions. We need to hear them. Um, great. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks, as always, to Himbre for letting us use their song Reach Out as our intro and outro song. And until next time, this has been Decision Space. Have a good night or
Bye, y'all.
morning, I guess. You're probably listening to this in the morning. Who knows? How do we usually sign this off? Goodbye.
Bye.